It seems as though in recent years, companies have been more and more consistently releasing their games on PC, whether that be part of Xbox Play Anywhere, an initiative designed to make as many Xbox games as possible be playable on computers, or PlayStation making their games available on Steam to admittedly mixed results, but this even spreading to third-party companies like Saga, who owe a lot of their recent success to the various ports and PC-exclusive franchises the company have made, along with the platform having a long and extensive history with indie games. And then you have Nintendo, who are probably the game company that is the most overprotected of their IPs, which makes sense when out of the big three console manufacturers, they're the only one to have franchises that both people care about worldwide and actually see somewhat consistent releases, at least when compared to Xbox's long-established history of failing to have any relevance in Asia, and PlayStation ignoring nearly everything they've made from the PS3 and before, with only a handful of exceptions. As a reminder, it took the Wii U being one of the biggest failures in their history, and the 3DS not being able to reach the same heights as previous handhelds, for them to even consider making games for mobile phones, one of the most lucrative revenue sources in the entire gaming landscape. By that rate, for the idea of officially putting their games on computers to even cross their mind, the Switch successor would have to be the first system to sell a whopping 7 units. Or I guess I should say putting their modern releases on PC, as Nintendo does actually have a fairly lengthy history of computer games. It's just no one talks about them because they're mostly terrible. So strap yourselves in as I take you on a journey through the officially released Nintendo games on PC. When Donkey Kong released in arcades and put Nintendo's name on the map, it was fairly natural that people would want to be able to play their games on home systems. However, this was in 1981, a whole 2 years before the Famicom released and 4 years before America would see the NES. So due to Nintendo not possessing the ability to break the space-time continuum, as far as we're aware, they ended up having to do what was pretty common for companies to do during this era: license out the game to various companies who would make their own version for certain systems. Nintendo would do this for Donkey Kong, its sequel, Donkey Kong Jr., and the original Mario Bros., all of which saw release on nearly every computer and home system at the time. For the specific companies involved with the various computer versions, you had Coleco, who were responsible for the Coleco Adam versions of Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Jr. Atari Inc. made the renditions of Donkey Kong for their 8-bit computers, such as the Atari 400 and 800, as well as the Apple II, TI-994A, MS-DOS, VIC-20, and the American Commodore 64 port, with Atari Corporation handling the Atari 8-bit versions of Mario Bros. Ocean Software made versions of Donkey Kong and Mario Bros. For the Amstrad CPC, ZX Spectrum, as well as the European Commodore 64 ports, along with the MSX version of Donkey Kong. And finally, Westside Softhouse were responsible for making a rendition of Mario Bros. For the NEC PC 8001. If you're interested in hearing a more in-depth look on any of these renditions of Nintendo's classic arcade games, I'd recommend watching the videos by The Lonely Goomba, where he plays every version and sees how they compare to the original arcade release, including the ones that never saw the light of day in an official capacity. Though I don't think you'll be shocked to hear that the vast majority of these were not as good as the original arcade counterparts. Though to be fair, this was something that was true across the board for basically every home release of an arcade game until arguably the 5th and 6th console generation. So how much of these is due to technical limitations and the people being in charge of the conversions just doing a bad job, I'll let you decide. Nintendo would later decide to end this practice for the most part, which not only meant they weren't cutting revenue with another company, but they could take the loss from not having their games on every system under the sun, due to the NES effectively running the entire US and Japanese gaming market. So they weren't exactly mulling over the potential money they could make from a Commodore 64 port of Donkey Kong 3 or Punch-Out! Now, that's not to say Nintendo had fully abandoned the practice, as there was one other company that got to make some home computer renditions of their games. This studio, being Hudson Soft, who would go on to be the original devs of the Mario Party series. Specifically, they made 2 original renditions of Mario Bros. With Punchball Mario Bros. And Mario Bros. Special, along with their own Super Mario Bros. Sequel titled Super Mario Bros. Special, with these games having been released exclusively in Japan, primarily for the NEC's 8000 series of computers and the Sharp X1, with Super Mario Bros. Special also seeing release in South Korea. After looking at these games, yep, they sure are special. To be fair, we were warned that the Demon of Babylon would disguise itself in the coat of the righteous. After this, Nintendo would stick to keeping their games on their systems, though by the time the 90s rolled around, there would be one specific genre that found a home on computers. So what genre was it? Platformers? RPGs? Action-adventures? Well... if there was one genre that was synonymous with 90s PC games, it was first-person shooters, but edutainment games were a close second. Or third. These are games that were primarily designed to be played by younger audiences with the goal of tricking them into learning stuff as they play. They're also rather infamous for being mostly terrible, which is why for the majority of people, the only ones they seem to remember fondly are the Oregon Trail games, or if you stretch the definition a bit, the various point-and-click adventure games made by Humongous Entertainment. Now, from what I could find, all of the Nintendo edutainment games from this era weren't actually made by Nintendo. Instead, these were games made by studios who were able to sort out licensing deals to put Nintendo characters in their games, sort of like the Mario and Zelda games for the Philips CDI. And if that doesn't tell you where to set your expectations, I don't know what will. Also, because of that, the only franchises that seem to get licensed out for this kind of stuff were Mario and Pokémon, as in addition to them being the company's most popular IPs, they're both especially popular with the genre's main demographic of children. For the Pokémon side of things, it's pretty much what you'd expect, mostly just simple activity centers or software designed to help teach kids how to use a computer. However, there's not much documentation on these games outside of dedicated wikis like the Bulbapedia, mostly due to a decent chunk of them being Japan exclusive. Though, while we're on topic, and since I don't really have a better place to talk about them, there are some other interesting Pokemon PC games, like the racing game Pokemon Team Turbo, or various video game adaptations of the trading card game. The most interesting to me was Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Gold Rescue Team, which was effectively a demo for Blue Rescue Team that was only available to members of the South Korean version of the Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Special Players site, though due to the website being inaccessible since 2008 and the demo itself requiring a connection to an online server that isn't functional anymore, it can't be played. Getting back on topic, the Mario edutainment games got their start with Mario Teaches Typing, which was made by Interplay and initially released for MS-DOS in 1992, which has a fairly self-explanatory title, effectively being a collection of Mario-themed minigames which attempt to help people learn how to efficiently use a keyboard. Really, the only super notable thing about the game is the fact it's actually the very first Mario game to give the Red Plumber a proper voice actor. The original MS-DOS release having him be voiced by Ronald B. Rubin.
Welcome to Mario Teaches Typing!
With the later Windows CD-ROM and Mac versions replacing him with Charles Martinet.
Hey, are you ready to Mario size? Okie dokie. You do just like Mario, okay?
Which in tandem with 1995's Mario's Fundamentals, another PC exclusive game which basically just has you play a collection of 5 board games with Mario, were some of the very first times he ever played the character before being officially cemented as his full-time voice actor with Super Mario 64. Besides these games, as well as a sequel to Teaches Typing, the only other Mario edutainment games with any kind of recognizability were the various games made by a company called the Software Toolworks, who seem to be mainly known for creating Mavis Beacon Teaches Typing, which funnily enough was the game that inspired the creation of Mario Teaches Typing. The specific titles they made were Mario is Missing and Mario's Time Machine, which sought out to teach geography and history respectively, as well as a trilogy of games intended for very young children titled Mario's Early Years, which taught you basic English, basic maths, and more general learning such as opposites and colors respectively. There's not really much to say about these games, as they're mostly just pretty boring, and the earliest games are made for babies, so it's not exactly something I can go in depth with. Though these games are much more well known than others, mainly thanks to the fact that, in addition to their releases on MS-DOS and Macintosh, all of them would get ports for the Super Nintendo, with Missing in Time Machine also getting NES versions. Honestly, for the various Mario Edutainment games, I don't think it's too much of an understatement to say that, other than Mario is Missing being the first game to have Luigi as the main protagonist, a whole 8 years before Luigi's Mansion, the most impact these games have had are their contributions to YouTube poop culture. As on top of the Mario head from the later re-releases and sequel to Mario Teaches Typing being a pretty popular source for YTPs back in the day, the PC version of Mario is Missing is the origin point of the Ouija meme. So that's something, I guess. From this point on, things are going to get more obscure, as during the latter half of the 90s and early 2000s is when Nintendo started being more restrictive of what could be done with their IPs. So the next couple of stops are going to be more smaller scale experiments than actual proper PC releases. Now, I'm sure most people watching this remember what Flash games are. These being fairly simplistic games that were primarily designed to run in web browsers using a program called Adobe Flash, which, outside of websites specifically designed to host that kind of content like Newgrounds, were predominantly used by sites designed for children. Personally, I remember playing a lot of them on the official websites for LEGO and various kids' TV channels. So, given what a phenomenon these things were, it shouldn't be too surprising to hear Nintendo would also have various Flash games made, some for the dedicated websites of specific releases, and others on the proper Nintendo website, but there were also being a few made in the Flash alternative, Adobe Shockwave. Now, unfortunately, since neither Flash or Shockwave are officially supported anymore, a decent chunk of these games have simply been lost to time, but thanks to the efforts of a small handful of people, some of them have actually been preserved and can be played through unofficial means. Though to be honest, there's not much to really talk about, since as mentioned, a lot of these games are very simple with not much going on, the majority of them being various quizzes and questionnaires related to specific franchises or games. The only real notable one is a Christmas-themed platformer called Mission in Snowdrift Land, which throughout the month of December in 2006 would unlock a new level every day during the build-up to Christmas, with each day featuring an ad for some Nintendo product at the time. It was delisted the following January before being brought back for the 2010 holiday season, with it being altered to promote various WiiWare games, only to once again be taken down in January 2011. What's interesting is that the studio who made the game, Tons of Bits, have actually remastered the title and made it available to buy on Steam in 2021, with everything coming full circle as a Switch port of the game came out this November. Though aside from that, you're more likely to get something out of the various fan-made Nintendo games across the web. Assuming Nintendo doesn't go on another DMCA rampage. Oh, who am I kidding? Of course they will. Okay, so I'm kind of cheating with this one, as it's not PC gaming in the traditional sense, but I think it's a bit too interesting to not mention. Now, I'm sure if you're vaguely aware of the modern PC landscape, you know who Nvidia are. However, there's a decent chance you might only know them for their main output of graphics cards and software. One of the various other things they've made is the Nvidia Shield TV, a micro console designed to download and stream select PC titles, effectively serving as a way to play PC games as if it was a console, and for a brief window of time, you could actually play a select number of Nintendo titles on the system, assuming you lived in China. For those unaware, China is one of those markets where, due to a variety of factors are frankly way too long-winded and complicated to get into here, it's kind of hard to establish an audience within the region if you're an outsider coming in, with that especially being true for video games, which is why Nintendo has often needed to find workarounds in order to release their stuff over there, whether that be the IQ line of systems, which helped bring over the N64, GBA, DS, and 3 3DS, or more recently with them partnering with Tencent to officially release the Switch in the region, with the Nvidia Shield releases of some of their games being one of these workarounds. The lineup consisted of some of the bigger releases for the Wii, namely you had New Super Mario Bros. Wii, Punch-Out Wii, and The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess all being available from the system's launch in the country, with it later also getting Super Mario Galaxy and Donkey Kong Country Returns. Unfortunately, due to both these ports and the Nvidia Shield itself selling poorly in China, they've been delisted since 2021, with a planned Mario Kart Wii port also being cancelled, which kinda sucks since from what I've heard, these conversions were actually pretty good, all probably upscaled to 1080p compared to the Wii's native 480p, and with reworked control schemes to remove the motion controls. In fact, it's even been suggested that the version of Mario Galaxy that was included in Super Mario 3D All-Stars is actually based off of the Nvidia Shield release. Again, this one doesn't really count as it was more a micro console that could play PC games, but I wanted to at least mention it as I feel this is arguably the closest we've gotten to official PC releases of Nintendo's modern titles. You know, if you consider over a decade ago, verging on 2 decades ago to be modern. And that's kind of it. There's a few other things here and there, like some more modern browser games made in HTML5, digital conversions of the Pokémon card game, as well as some older software that I'd argue are more general activity centers than video games, but we'd be scraping the bottom of the barrel by that point. There's also the extensive history of emulators designed to run Nintendo games, but frankly that's its own separate story, better saved for another time. In the meantime, it doesn't seem like Nintendo has any particular interest in putting Switch titles or games for whatever the Switch's successor ends up being on PC anytime soon. But who knows? Maybe tomorrow they'll announce their own game launcher locked behind a Switch Online subscription. The future is unpredictable and you'll never truly know what's coming until it happens. But until then, we'll just have to keep waiting for the future where computers can finally play some of these all-time classics. You know, assuming you don't just emulate them, which always has and will continue to be an option.